The door was already open when everything changed. Not metaphorically. Literally. The door to my bedroom in my mother's house in Little Havana, Miami, on a Saturday afternoon in October, when the light comes through the windows at that particular angle that makes everything look more significant than it probably is. I was standing with my back to the door, pulling a shirt over my head, thinking about absolutely nothing, the specific, merciful blankness of a mind between tasks, when I heard footsteps in the hallway that I recognized without turning around. And then I heard them stop. I turned around slowly, the shirt still halfway on, and Paloma Vasquez was standing in the doorway of my bedroom with one hand still on the door handle and her eyes on me. She didn't look away, not immediately, not in the half second that a mistake takes to correct itself. She stood there, 47 years old, my mother's oldest friend, a woman I had known since I was learning to walk. And she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before and did not have a name for. And the silence between us lasted exactly long enough to become something it could never unbecome. Then she stepped back. She pulled the door almost closed. She said, from the other side of it, in a voice that was nearly steady, "Lo siento, Yara." I thought this was the bathroom, and I stood there with my shirt half on, and my heart doing something I couldn't explain, and I said, "It's okay." It was not okay. Nothing about the next 6 months would be okay. Let me tell you about Paloma before I tell you about what happened between us, because she deserves to be seen as a full person before this story turns her into the woman at the center of my confusion. That's the thing about people we fall for. We have a tendency to flatten them into the role they play in our lives, to make them characters instead of humans. I don't want to do that to her. She was too real, too complicated, too entirely herself for that. Paloma Reyes Vasquez had grown up in Havana with my mother. They were childhood friends who had emigrated separately and found each other again in Miami in their late 20s, which they both described as one of the stranger and more beautiful accidents of their lives. My mother was warm and chaotic, and filled every room she entered with noise. Paloma was the opposite. Measured, precise, the kind of person who thought before speaking and meant every word she said. They balanced each other in that way that certain friendships do, each one carrying what the other couldn't. Paloma was an architect. She had her own firm in Coral Gables. Not large, but respected, the kind of practice built on integrity and repetition rather than spectacle. She designed residential homes mostly, occasionally a public building, once a small community library in Hialeah that I had visited and found unexpectedly moving. The way the light came through the windows at specific hours, the way the space breathed. I remember thinking, standing in that library at 19, that the person who designed this understood something about how humans need to feel held by the spaces they occupy. She had been married. His name was Rodrigo, a good man by all accounts, a cardiologist who had loved her genuinely and whom she had loved back as much as she was capable of at the time. They had been together for 11 years and divorced 6 years before the October I'm telling you about. No dramatic ending, no betrayal. Just two people who had grown into different shapes and had the rare integrity to acknowledge it before resentment calcified into permanence. They remained cordial. There were no children. She lived alone in a house in Coconut Grove that she had designed herself. Not large, but deliberate. Every element chosen. I had been inside it many times over the years, for family dinners and birthday celebrations, and the casual dropping in that characterized her relationship with my mother. I knew where she kept the good coffee. I knew she didn't own a television. I knew she woke up at 5:30 every morning and spent the first hour of her day reading before she did anything else. I had known her my entire life. And somehow, or maybe not somehow, maybe this is exactly how it works, I had never truly seen her until she was standing in my doorway not looking away. You know what it's like when you can't unsee something? When your brain, which has been organizing the world in a particular way for years, suddenly reorganizes everything around a new piece of information, and you realize the map you've been using was incomplete all along. That's what happened to me after that Saturday. I didn't sleep well that night. I told myself it was the heat. October in Miami still carries summer in its back pocket, and our air conditioning was unreliable. But I knew it wasn't the heat. I lay in the dark in the bedroom where she had stood, and I ran the moment back through my mind with a specificity that told me everything I needed to know about what was happening inside me. The way her hand had stayed on the door handle, not releasing it, not stepping further in, just stopped. The expression on her face, not predatory, not embarrassed exactly. Something more interior than either of those things, something that looked like recognition. The way she had said "lo siento" from behind the door, not rushing the words, not over-apologizing, just offering them with that particular Paloma quality of saying exactly what she meant and nothing more. I was 22 years old, and I understood, lying in the dark, that I had felt something in those few seconds that I had never felt before in my life. Not attraction exactly, or not only that. Something more like being witnessed. Being seen by someone whose seeing meant something, for reasons I couldn't entirely articulate. I also understood, with the same quiet clarity, that this was a thing I was not allowed to feel. She was 47. I was 22. She was my mother's best friend, had been since before I existed. Would be long after I no longer lived in that house. She was Cuban, from a generation and a culture that had particular ideas about certain things, and while I had no specific evidence about what Paloma believed about those things, the architecture of my life, little Havana, my grandmother's rosary on the kitchen wall, the way certain conversations simply never happened in our household, did not make me optimistic, and I was, at that point, not fully out. Not to my mother. Not to most of the people in my daily life. I had a small, careful handful of people who knew, and I kept that knowledge contained, protected, away from the parts of my world that felt fragile. So I lay in the dark, and I told myself, this is nothing. This was a moment, and moments pass, and you will see her at Sunday dinner in 2 weeks, and everything will be exactly what it has always been, and you will be fine. I told myself that for a long time. She didn't come to Sunday dinner 2 weeks later. My mother mentioned it casually. Paloma had a project deadline. She sent her apologies. She'd come next time. My mother said it while stirring something on the stove, not looking at me, not attaching any significance to it. I sat at the kitchen table and nodded and said that's too bad, and felt something drop in my stomach that I refused to examine. She didn't come the following Sunday either, or the one after that. My mother began to notice. I could see it in the way she'd pick up her phone after dinner and put it back down without calling, in the slight furrow between her eyebrows when Paloma's name came up, and then resolved into something practiced and neutral. Whatever was happening between them, or not happening, my mother was managing it privately, in the way she managed most difficult things, which was to continue functioning at full volume and process everything else underneath. I didn't ask. I didn't have the language to ask without revealing why I was asking. I went to work at the gallery. I came home. I had dinner with my mother. I texted my friends and went out twice and laughed at the right moments, and came home and lay in my bed and thought about a woman standing in a doorway, not looking away, and hated myself a little for it, and then thought about it again anyway. Have you ever wanted something you had absolutely no right to want? Not because anyone had forbidden it, but because you had forbidden it yourself, because you understood all the ways it was impossible, and your wanting it felt like a personal failing, like evidence of something broken in you. That's where I was. For 3 months. That's exactly where I was. And if that's where you are right now, with something you're not letting yourself name, I want you to know that you're not alone in this room. This channel exists for exactly these stories. The ones that don't fit anywhere else. If you're new here, stay. Subscribe. We tell the truth here, even when it's complicated. The 4th Sunday she missed, I did something I had not planned to do. I drove to her house in Coconut Grove. I told myself I was in the neighborhood, which was not entirely false. I had a friend who lived nearby and had been meaning to visit. I told myself I was just checking in, that it was a normal thing to do, that I had known this woman my entire life, and it was not strange for me to knock on her door. I parked on the street outside her house, the one she had designed herself, low and horizontal with wide overhanging eaves, and a garden that was considered and beautiful. And I sat in my car for 4 minutes before I got out. I knocked. She opened the door wearing reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and holding a pencil, which meant she had been working, which meant I had interrupted her, which meant I should probably leave. Her dark hair had more gray in it than I had noticed before, or maybe I was noticing more now. She was wearing a simple white linen shirt and dark trousers, and she looked, as she always looked, like someone who had made deliberate choices about every aspect of how she moved through the world. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "Yara. Just my name." The way she said it, not surprised, not unwelcoming, just naming the fact of me standing there, told me she had thought about this possibility, that she had maybe been waiting for it. "Hi," I said, brilliantly. "I was nearby. I wanted to check in. My mom has been wondering about you, a beat." "Come in," she said. Her house was exactly as I remembered it, and somehow completely different. Or I was different, which amounted to the same thing. I sat at her kitchen counter while she made coffee without asking if I wanted any, because she knew I did, and I looked at the drafting table visible through the open doorway of her studio, and the books on her shelves and the single orchid on the windowsill. And I thought, this woman built a life with intention. Every single piece of it. We talked for 2 hours, not about the doorway, not about the Sundays she had missed. We talked about her project, a house she was designing for a family in Pinecrest, complicated by a site that sloped in 3 directions. We talked about the gallery where I worked, and the artist whose show we were mounting, and whether I thought I wanted to go back to school for art history, or whether I was still deciding. We talked about my mother, carefully, the way you talk around something without addressing it directly. It was the most normal conversation in the world, and underneath it, the entire time, was the thing we were not saying, present in every pause, every moment when one of us finished speaking, and the other took slightly too long to respond. Every time our eyes met and held for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. We stood in the doorway, her inside, me on the step below, which put us at almost exactly the same height for once, because Paloma was tall and I was not. She said, "Tell your mother I'll come next Sunday," I said. "She'll be glad." And then neither of us moved for a moment, and I thought, with a clarity that frightened me, she feels this too, not as a hope or a projection, as a fact. The way you know certain things, not because you've been told, but because your body has registered them in a language older than words. Then I stepped back. I said goodnight. I walked to my car. I drove home with both hands on the wheel, and my mind completely blank. The specific blankness of someone who has understood something enormous and needs a few hours before they can look at it directly. She came back the following Sunday. My mother made ropa vieja and played Celia Cruz too loud, and the house filled up the way it always did when Paloma was in it. Not with more noise, paradoxically, but with a kind of completed quality, like a sentence that had been waiting for its final word. I watched my mother's face when Paloma walked in, and saw something I hadn't registered before, the particular relief of someone whose world has been slightly off-axis and has just been corrected. They loved each other, those 2 women, in the specific, unromantic, completely essential way that a lifelong friendship becomes a form of survival. I understood that watching them that evening, and it sat in my chest alongside everything else I was carrying, complicated, heavy, real. Paloma greeted me the same way she always had. A kiss on the cheek, my name said with that particular intonation, her hand briefly on my shoulder. All of it completely normal, all of it now, carrying a current beneath the surface that I felt in my fingertips. Dinner was loud and warm and easy. My mother's neighbor came by uninvited, as he always did, and was fed without complaint. There was arguing about baseball. There was laughter about something that had happened 30 years ago in Havana that I had heard referenced but never fully understood. There was the particular comfort of being in a room full of people who have known each other long enough that silence is not awkward. I watched Paloma, not obviously, not in a way anyone would notice. I hoped, but I watched the way she listened when my mother spoke, the specific quality of her attention. I watched the way she held her wine glass, the way she cut her food, the way she smiled at something my mother said. Not the public smile she wore in professional contexts, but the real one, slower, that reached her eyes. I watched her hands, architect's hands, precise and expressive, moving when she talked about something she cared about. I watched her not watch me, which was its own kind of watching. After dinner, while my mother and the neighbor were arguing about something in the living room, I was in the kitchen washing dishes. A habit I'd developed as a teenager, the dishwashing as a way of being useful and also of having somewhere to put my hands and my eyes. Paloma came in carrying plates. She set them on the counter beside me. She didn't leave. She picked up a dish towel and started drying what I washed, which was something she had done hundreds of times in this kitchen over the years, which was completely ordinary, which should not have felt the way it felt. We stood side by side at the sink. The noise from the living room reached us muffled. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and the specific warmth of a house that has been cooked in. She said, without looking at me, "How are you, Yara? Really?" Not how are you as a greeting. How are you really? The version of the question that asks for something true. I kept my hands in the soapy water. I said, "I'm figuring things out. You know how it is at 22. I remember 22, she said. She was quiet for a moment. It's an age when things become clear whether you're ready for them to or not. I turned and looked at her profile. She was looking at the plate she was drying, her face entirely composed. I said, "Is that what happened to you at 22? She considered that. She set the dry plate aside and picked up another. "Something like it," she said. "Yes, the sounds from the living room, the water running, the clink of dishes." I said, "Paloma." She turned and looked at me. We were close. The kitchen was small, the counter narrow. I could see the gray in her hair up close, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the particular steadiness of her gaze that had always been one of the things about her that felt like solid ground. I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She didn't look away. She said, "Okay." That Saturday, in the doorway. I kept my voice level. I watched her face. Was it an accident? A silence that lasted long enough to be its own answer. Then she said quietly, "The walking in was an accident." She put the dish towel down on the counter. She looked at me for another moment, the expression I had first seen in my doorway, the one I still didn't have a precise name for. Then she turned and walked back to the living room, and I stood at the sink with my hands in the cooling water and understood that she had just told me everything. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation that said more in what wasn't said than in what was? Where the pauses carried more weight than the words? Where you walked away knowing something enormous and having absolutely nothing you could point to as proof? That's where I lived for months, in the language of almost. If you're listening to this and something in you is recognizing it, write it in the comments. Just your city, just where you are right now. There's something about knowing we're all out there, in different places, carrying different versions of the same story. And if you found this channel today, you're in the right place. Subscribe. We don't judge here. We just tell the truth. What followed was the strangest period of my life. Paloma came back to Sunday dinners. Everything resumed its surface normalcy. The food, the noise, the laughter, the particular ritual of our family's version of togetherness. On the surface, nothing had changed. Underneath, everything was different. We had established something in that kitchen conversation, not a beginning exactly, but an acknowledgement, a mutual recognition that the thing between us existed without naming it, without deciding anything about it, without taking a single step toward it. We had looked at each other and said, without words, "I see it. I see that you see it. We are not going to pretend otherwise." And then we went right back to pretending otherwise. Because what else were we going to do? She was 47, I was 22. She was my mother's best friend, woven into the fabric of my family in ways that predated my existence. She was a private, measured woman who had built her entire life on deliberate choices, and I was someone whose own identity was still half hidden from the people I loved most. The gap between us was not just age. It was circumstance, history, the specific weight of what it would cost both of us to acknowledge the thing out loud. So we didn't. Instead, we developed a language of almost. It looked like this. She would arrive on Sunday and greet me the same way she always had. And there would be a half second in that greeting. her cheek against mine, her hand on my shoulder, where I was aware of the care with which she managed the distance, not coldness, precision. Like someone who knows exactly how close they can stand to a fire without getting burned and has chosen that distance deliberately. It looked like conversations where we talked around the edges of real things, her asking about my work, genuinely interested, following up on things I'd mentioned the week before with a specificity that told me she had been paying attention. Me asking about her projects with the same genuine interest, which had always been there and was now layered with something else. It looked like her eyes finding mine across my mother's dinner table, at moments that had no particular reason to happen, and both of us looking away at the same time, and neither of us mentioning it. It looked like one evening when I walked into the kitchen and she was alone in there, and we both stopped. And the awareness of being alone in a room together was so loud for a moment that I actually stepped back into the doorway before going in, and she noticed. And something flickered across her face, something I recognized as the same effort I was making. And then we both just continued existing in the kitchen, as if none of that had happened. I told one person, my friend Daniela, 25, born and raised in Wynwood, queer in the open and unapologetic way that I was learning from by proximity. We had met at the gallery where I worked, and had the kind of friendship that becomes essential quickly, the kind where you skip the small talk within 3 weeks and go straight to the real things. I told her one evening over drinks at a place we like near Brickell, in a low voice, without looking at her while I said it. I told her about the doorway, about the kitchen, about the Sunday dinners, and the language of almost, and the fact that I was losing my mind over a woman who was 25 years older than me and my mother's best friend, and I didn't know what to do with any of it. Daniela was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Is she queer?" "I don't know," I said. I think there's something there, but I don't know her history. We've never talked about it directly." "Do you want her?" The directness of the question, Daniela asking the thing I had been circling for months. "Yes," I said. The word felt like setting something heavy down. "Does she want you?" I thought about the doorway, the kitchen, the fraction of a second pauses, the care with which she managed distance. "I think so," I said. "But I think she's decided not to." Daniela was quiet again, turning her glass in her hands. Then she said, "Those are two different problems." "What do you mean?" "Whether she wants you, that's information. What she decides to do about it, that's a choice. You can't make her choice for her, but you can decide whether you want to keep living in the space between those two things." I sat with that for a long time. The space between those two things. That was exactly where I was living, and Daniela had just named it with the precision of someone who loved me enough to be honest. My mother asked me about it, not directly. My mother was not a person who did things directly. She operated through the side door of oblique questions and carefully casual observations. But one evening in December, when we were sitting on the back porch after dinner, and the Miami night was warm, and the neighborhood was making its particular music, she said, looking at the middle distance rather than at me, "You seem different lately." I said, "Different how?" She was quiet for a moment, quieter. "Here but not here sometimes." A pause. "Is there someone?" And the specific, precise cruelty of that question, asked by my mother who didn't know about me, who had never been told, who deserved to know but whom I had protected from knowing, for reasons I had always told myself were about timing, landed in the exact place it needed to land. I said, "Not really. No." She nodded, slowly, in the way that told me she didn't entirely believe me, but wasn't going to push. She said, "Yara, whatever is happening, you can tell me. You know that." I looked at her. My mother, 61 years old, who had emigrated from Cuba at 23 and built a life from scratch and raised me alone after my father left and never complained about any of it, who lit a candle at church every Sunday and fed every person who came through her door, and had loved her daughter with a completeness that I had never once doubted. I said, "I know, Mommy." I didn't tell her. That night I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and felt the specific weight of carrying too many things that needed to be put down. My own identity, still half hidden. The thing with Paloma, unnamed and unresolved, the gap between who I was becoming and who my family had understood me to be. Something needed to change. I just didn't know yet which thing would move first. It broke open on a Wednesday in February. Not a Sunday, not a family dinner. A Wednesday afternoon when I went to Paloma's office in Coral Gables because she had asked me, through my mother, casually, which I understood immediately as the choice it was, if I would look at some artwork options for a client's home. The client had a significant collection and wanted a young curatorial perspective. My mother had mentioned my work at the gallery. Paloma had thought of me. It was a professional meeting. I arrived at her office, clean, minimal, the work pinned and spread across her large drafting table, and we spent 2 hours being entirely professional. She showed me the space. I gave her my thoughts on the artwork. She asked good questions. I answered them honestly. We drank coffee from the good machine her assistant ran. At the end of it, she said, "This was useful, thank you." I said, "Of course." I started putting my jacket on. She said, "Yara," I stopped. She was standing at her drafting table, both hands flat on the surface, looking at the plans spread in front of her rather than at me. Her voice was careful, measured. The Paloma voice, the one that had always felt like solid ground. But underneath it, something else, something effortful. She said, "I owe you an honest conversation. I've been avoiding it. That wasn't fair." I put my jacket down. She looked up at me then. The expression I had first seen in the doorway, the one I had been reading and rereading for 4 months, clear now. Unguarded in a way I had not seen before. She said, "I think you know that what happened in October was not entirely an accident. The walking in was an accident. The rest of it..." She stopped, started again. "I have spent a long time organizing my life very carefully, making deliberate choices, not allowing things I couldn't see the shape of. I was very still." She said, "You are 22 years old, and you are my oldest friend's daughter. And I am 47, and I have known you since you were learning to walk. Every reasonable part of my understanding of the world says that what I felt standing in that doorway is something I should have walked away from immediately and completely, a silence. But," I said. She looked at me steadily. "There is no but that changes any of those facts." "That's not what I heard," I said. "What did you hear?" "I heard someone who has been trying to talk themselves out of something for 4 months. The silence between us was different from the kitchen silence, fuller, more dangerous." She said, "Yara, I'm not asking you to do anything," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. This isn't me pushing you toward something. I just want to be honest, because I'm tired of the other thing. I'm tired of the almost." I looked at her directly. "I feel something when I'm near you. I have since October, and maybe before that, maybe a long time before that, and I just wasn't equipped to see it. And I think you feel something too, and I think you've decided not to act on it. And I actually think I understand why. But I needed to say it out loud to at least one person who already knows, because carrying it alone is making me disappear." She was very quiet. Then she said, "Sit down." We talked for a long time. The office emptied around us, her assistant left, the building went quiet. The Coral Gables afternoon turned into evening outside the windows. We sat across from each other at her small meeting table with cold coffee and the plans for someone else's house spread out between us, and we finally had the conversation that had been building since October. She told me things I hadn't known. She told me that her marriage to Rodrigo had ended not only because they had grown into different shapes, but because she had spent the last years of it understanding something about herself that she had spent her whole life not quite looking at directly. She didn't say it with the language I would have used. She was of a generation and a culture where certain words came differently if they came at all. But she said it clearly enough. She said, "I have not allowed myself to want the things I have sometimes wanted. I made choices that kept me safe, and I do not entirely regret them. But I understand now that some of what I was protecting myself from was my own nature." She told me that seeing me in October had been, and she chose this word deliberately, clarifying, in a way she hadn't been prepared for. She told me that she had spent the months since then in a negotiation with herself that she was not winning. I listened to all of it, and when she was done, I said, "Why are you telling me this?" She said, "Because you were honest with me, and you deserve the same, but it doesn't change anything," I said, not as a challenge, just checking. She looked at her hands on the table. "Your mother is my oldest friend. She stopped. "If something happened between us and it ended badly, or even if it didn't end badly, I don't know what that does to my friendship with her. To your relationship with her, to the thing that has held your family and mine together for 30 years. She looked up. "I can want something, and also understand that wanting it has a cost I'm not willing to pay. Both of those things are true." I sat with that. Then I said, "What if it didn't end badly?" She almost smiled. "You're 22. You keep saying that like it answers something." "It does. It describes an age gap," I said. "It doesn't describe what I'm capable of feeling or what I understand about risk or what I'm willing to carry." She looked at me for a long time, and I saw something move across her face. Something that looked like being seen, maybe. Or like recognizing something she hadn't expected. And then she closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she was composed again. "I know," she said quietly. "I know that. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "I meant..." She stopped. Started again. "I meant that at 22, you have a life ahead of you that should not be organized around the limitations of a woman who is 47 and still figuring out how to be brave about who she is." She said it carefully, not as rejection, as something that cost her to say. "You deserve someone who meets you without all of this, without the history, the complications, the cost." "What if I don't want someone without all of this?" I said. "What if this is exactly what I want?" Silence. "Yara," she said, my name in her voice, that specific intonation, "please." And I understood then what she was asking me for. Not agreement, not understanding. She was asking me to let her hold the line she had drawn because she needed it to hold. Because without it, something in her careful, deliberate life would shift in ways she wasn't ready for. I loved her enough to give her that. "I need to stop here and just be with you for a second. Because this is the part of the story that I think some of you know. Not this specific story, your version of it. The person you wanted who couldn't meet you where you were. The love that was real and impossible at the same time. The moment you decided to respect someone else's limits even when it cost you. From what city are you listening to this right now? Write it in the comments. Seriously. I want to know. Miami, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta, somewhere in Texas, somewhere in Georgia, somewhere overseas, wherever you are. I want you to know that this channel is your space too. And if you've never been here before, this is what we do. We tell the true stories. Subscribe, come back. You're not alone. I told my mother 2 weeks later, not about Paloma, about me. I sat down with her on a Sunday afternoon. A Sunday when Paloma was not there, when it was just the two of us and Celia Cruz on the speaker at a lower volume than usual, and the coffee my mother made that was always better than anyone else's, and I told her I was gay, that I had known for years, that I was sorry it had taken me this long to say it out loud to her face, that I loved her and I needed her to know who I was. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she cried, and then she said, Yara, I just want you to be happy." And then she cried some more, and then she made us both more coffee. It was not a perfect conversation. There were harder ones that followed, questions she had, things she needed to understand, moments over the following weeks where I could see her processing in real time, adjusting the picture she had held of my life. It was not linear, it was not clean, but it was real. And after years of carrying it in the closed part of myself, putting it down, even partially, even messily, felt like being able to breathe properly for the first time in a very long time. I didn't tell her about Paloma. That part I kept. Some things belong only to the people who are inside them. Paloma and I never spoke about that Wednesday evening again. By unspoken agreement, it had been said and was now held. Somewhere between us, privately, neither pursued nor denied. Sunday dinners continued. The warmth was real. The friendship between our families was real. What had passed between us in her office was real. We learned to be in the same room with all of it. Not easily. Not at first. There were Sundays in those first months where I would feel the weight of it, and I could see that she felt it too. And we would both make the choice, again, quietly, privately, to set it aside and be present in the room we were actually in. Over time, it became easier. Or not easier. More integrated. The feeling didn't go away. I'm not going to tell you that it dissolved neatly into friendship, and I forgot about it because that's not true. And I don't want to lie to you. But it became something I could carry without being carried by it, something that existed alongside the rest of my life, rather than underneath it. Here is what I understood, on the other side of all of it, that loving someone is not sufficient justification for pursuing them. That the most honest thing is sometimes the thing that stays unacted upon. That Paloma was not wrong to hold her line. She was protecting something real. Something that mattered. Something that her wisdom and age and experience had told her she was right to protect. That I was not wrong to feel what I felt either. That wanting something impossible doesn't make you broken. That naming it, at least once, at least to the right person, is sometimes the only form of relief available. That coming out to my mother, which I had been terrified of for years, did not end the world. That she was bigger than my fear of her reaction. That I had been carrying something alone that didn't need to be carried alone. That the version of me who sat in her car outside Paloma's house for 4 minutes before getting out, terrified and wanting and not yet sure she was allowed to be either of those things, deserved more than I was giving her at the time. She was figuring it out. She was doing the best she could. She deserved patience, including from herself. I'm 24 now. A lot has changed and the important things haven't. I still work at the gallery, though I've been promoted and I'm now thinking seriously about graduate school. I live in my own apartment in Wynwood. Small. Mine. The first place that has felt entirely like me, rather than a version of me shaped around other people's needs. I have Daniela and a small, solid group of people who know who I am and love me without qualifications. My mother and I are better than we have ever been. There is a version of our relationship now that didn't exist before that Sunday conversation. Deeper, more honest, less careful. She asks about my life and means the whole of it. I tell her things I couldn't tell her before. Something that had been slightly off-axis between us for years has been corrected. Paloma comes to Sunday dinners. She and I are, and this is true, even if it sounds like something I'm telling myself to be okay, genuinely good. The thing that happened between us is part of the texture of our relationship now. Not as an open wound, but as something that happened, and was honest, and is held. There is care between us. There is respect. There is a specific, complicated warmth that belongs entirely to people who have been honest with each other in a difficult moment and survived it. She has, in the past year, become someone different in small ways that I notice and don't comment on. She has a friend, a woman she mentions occasionally, with a particular quality of quiet in her voice when she does. I don't ask about it. It's not mine to ask, but I notice it, and something in me, the part that wanted her to find her way toward her own honesty, is glad. I am dating someone. A woman named Sina, 30, Ghanaian American, a civil rights attorney who has the most organized mind I have ever encountered, and the most contagious laugh. We are 3 months in, and I am being present in it, actually present. Not performing, not managing, just there. It is new, and careful, and real. I don't know where it goes. I don't need to know yet. What I know is this. I am 24 years old, and I am standing in my own life for the first time. Not performing a version of it, not carrying it hidden, not living in the almost of something I couldn't allow myself to want. Just here. Fully and imperfectly, and actually here. That is not a small thing. It is, actually, everything. And here is what I want to leave with you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, whatever you're carrying that doesn't have a name yet. The thing you're not letting yourself want is not evidence of something broken in you. The feeling you're managing and containing and telling yourself isn't real. It's real. You know it's real. The fact that it's complicated, the fact that it's impossible, the fact that it costs something, none of that makes it less real, and you don't have to act on it. Sometimes you don't, and that's its own form of courage, but you deserve. At minimum, to let yourself acknowledge it. In the privacy of your own mind, or in the presence of one person you trust, or in a place like this one where nobody knows your name and the story can be exactly what it is. You are not too much. You are not wrong for feeling it. You are not broken for wanting something complicated. You are a person in the middle of your life, figuring out who you are, doing the best you can with what you have. That is enough. That has always been enough. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. This channel exists for stories like this one. The true ones, the complicated ones, the ones that don't have neat resolutions but are worth telling anyway. If this story reached you today, if it landed somewhere real, subscribe. Come back. Bring someone else who needs to hear it. And tell me where you are. Right now. In this moment. Reading or listening to this, what city? Drop it in the comments. Miami, Atlanta, Houston, New York, London, São Paulo, Lagos, Toronto. Wherever you are, you're not alone in this. We're all out here, carrying different versions of the same story. And we're all going to be okay. See you in the next one.